Okay, perfect. So as I explained before, this session is just kind of avoiding disputes and resolving conflicts using our either our adjudication service or our self-resolution service. As I say, this is just a wee quick presentation, and then it will just be a question and answer session with myself and Dan. So we will just get right into it. So we might get into it. There we go. So what is ADR? ADR stands for Alternative Dispute Resolution, and this is resolving a dispute without having to go to court. Now, it's completely evidence-based, so the whole decision is based on any evidence that is provided by yourselves. It is a legally binding decision, and the kind of our outcome is to provide a fair and reasonable outcome. So that is the aim of the adjudicators there. Okay. In comparison to court, we can't take counterclaims into consideration, and we will discuss this later on in this PowerPoint. Counterclaims are things like maybe if the tenant didn't pay rent because heating wasn't working and things like that. That is something that would need to be taken to either a small claims court or a first-tier tribunal. And as it says there, some more complex cases may be better suited to a court hearing. So it is worth when you are kind of making your claim, just so you know whether or not it is something that we can take into consideration or if it is something that may be better suited elsewhere. Okay. I should also say that our adjudicators, they are all impartial and they all are members of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. They either come from a law or a property background. So they very much know what it is that they're doing. And as I say, they are impartial and they are actually outsourced by Safe Deposit Scotland. They don't actually work in the office with us. And this is just so their impartiality can kind of remain high. And it means that the first sight that they actually have of the cases is when that evidence lands on their desk. That is kind of the first sighting they have of the case, the first kind of understanding they have of the case, and that just means that they remain unbiased and they remain impartial. Okay. So as I said before, what is a counterclaim? This is, as I said, is something that we can't take into consideration, and this is where maybe the tenant says, I didn't pay my rent because, and as you will know, that is a breach of the tenancy agreement, and although a tenant can kind of hold back rent, it must all be repaid at the end of the tenancy. So where maybe it's like heating doesn't work, or I don't know, maybe the windows maybe aren't sealed correctly and a tenant says, I didn't pay my rent because of this, that would be a counterclaim, and that would be something that the tenants would need to settle through the first tier tribunal and such, because we can't take that into consideration there. Okay. And what is an offset? So again, an offset is something that we can't take into consideration. And this is where it's an exchange of rent for works and treatment and things. So as it says there, I redecorated the property at my own expense. Again, that is a breach of the tenancy agreement by the tenants, and that would be something that they would need to seek recourse through from the first tier tribunal. Unfortunately, as I said before, we can't take those things into consideration. The only things that the adjudicators can kind of be mindful of when coming to a decision is decisions based on things such as cleaning, redecoration, gardening, things like that, things which are directly related to the deposit. Anything else would need to be kind of seeked elsewhere there. Okay. So what are the benefits of avoiding adjudication? So this means parties are able to keep control of the disputed amount. It saves a considerable length of time. It removes any worry and stress over the process, and you get the money back quickly. So this is where the self-resolution side of things comes into play, and where me, Dan, and our other two colleagues, Cameron and Paula, we all get involved at this stage. And this is where we realize that maybe communications have broken down over the tenancy, and maybe some parties aren't willing to kind of talk to each other. We act as a third party, we get kind of involved there, and we're able to reopen those lines of communication and kind of open the gates to the idea of a resolution there. So as it says, it saves a considerable length of time. Anybody who has been through the ADR process knows it is quite a lengthy one. It does take a couple of months, whereas if you go kind of are more open to the idea of self-resolution, we can get payments back in as quick as like a week or a couple of weeks. So it is something to be mindful of kind of when you do go through ADR, that to bear in mind that self-resolution is an option and it is a very useful one. We've seen our rates of self-resolution actually rise over the past couple of months, and I do believe, I'm sure Dan will correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe we're sitting at a 52% success rate at self-resolution at the moment, which is quite high, and we have managed to get payments back to parties quicker. And as I say, it just removes any worry and stress, and it means you don't need to go through the whole process. You don't need to go through the whole evidence gathering process there. So if you do find yourself maybe coming with a dispute, just bear in mind self-resolution, because it is kind of worth it in the end. Okay. Or as it all says here, I always do this, I always jump ahead of myself. So the slide says 48%, but I do believe that has actually rose to 52%. So I do need to get that changed there. And as it says, we will reach out to you and we will offer help in negotiating. Again, as I say, sometimes tenancies don't end on the best of terms. Parties aren't talking to one another, and that's where we can kind of get involved. And as it says there, we're here to listen and offer you the best advice. So perhaps when you reach out to us and we ask if you have the correct evidence, and maybe for some reason you might not have the correct evidence, we can offer you advice on how to maybe proceed in another direction. On the same kind of line, we can offer advice to like the tenants, we can offer advice to the agents on the best way of action going forward, should maybe communications be broken down. And it even is sometimes as simple as just each party doesn't really understand what it is the other party's wanting, and that's where we can kind of get involved and just make things a wee bit easier. As it says there, communication and an open mind are key. So when you are entering the self-resolution kind of process, it's no good to coming in with like a closed mind. You do need to keep an open mind, and just remember that talking between the parties is useful, and we can kind of help and get the money kind of paid back out a wee bit quicker there. Okay. So fair wear and tear. So this is something that people need to be mindful of when they are kind of making their claims, and that is to take fair wear and tear into consideration. So this is reasonable use of the premises by the tenant and the ordinary operation of natural forces. So for example, I live in a property with just my partner. We would have less fair wear and tear than perhaps a family who live in the property with maybe 3 kids and 2 dogs. They're going to have a wee bit more fair wear and tear, and you just need to be mindful of that, and be mindful that there is a level of change expected from everyday use of the property. So when you are making your claims, just be careful that you do take that into consideration, because that is something the adjudicators will look at. And as it says there, a level of wear and tear is expected. That's expected over any tenancy. Obviously, the longer the tenancy, the more fair and wear, the more fair wear and tear is expected. Cleaning is not covered by fair wear and tear. Simply put, if something's not clean, it's not clean. That's it. And my goodness, I'll get somebody else's teeth in today. Damage beyond the scope of reasonable everyday use is unlikely to be fair wear and tear. So for example, if a cupboard is hanging off its hinges, that's probably unlikely to be fair wear and tear, and that would be classed as damage there. Okay, next one. Oh, that's it. I thought we were a slide behind. As I said, that was just a wee quick presentation. So let me stop sharing this screen, and I hope you've all had your thinking caps on for some questions. So does anybody have any? As I say, either shout it to us or pop in the chat box, and we can kind of get the ball rolling, and we can start answering some questions, okay? Okay, while people are thinking of a couple of questions, Dan, do you think I've missed anything? Do you think I need to go over anything else, or?
Yeah, Sam, I think you covered quite a bit there, and yeah, obviously, while people think of questions, it is fairly difficult to just come up with a question on the spot when put under pressure like that. But I guess when coming to us, I think people need to know that when entering the early resolution process, we expect to see some level of communication between tenants and landlords or agents before you try to resolve things with us. So that's sort of a prerequisite to what we do in early resolution. What we'll ask for when you come to us is evidence that you've tried to resolve things between yourselves. What we'll then go on to ask once you've provided that is an inventory and a checkout document, as well as a tenancy agreement. So that's just for us to just to aid our conversation between parties. We need to be able to see the tenancy, how it changed over the tenancy before and after inventory and checkout documents, and that just really helps us assess what Sam has gone over, assess the fair wear and tear that we can afford to the property, and assess any kind of counts of damage or betterment that may be associated with it.
Perfect. As Dan says, I probably should have mentioned that, to be honest. The adjudicator looks for 4 main pieces of evidence, and that is the tenancy agreement, the check-in report, the checkout report, and if you are claiming for rent, it would be a rent statement. So those are the main documents that any adjudicator will look for regardless of the claim. You do need those 4 documents. On top of that, things like photographs, invoices, quotations, contractor statements, they're helpful, but they're only helpful if we have those other documents as well. Okay. Perfect. Has anybody asked any questions? Let me check the box. Nope. Does anybody have anything at all? It doesn't need to be related to self-resolution, just ADR related, anything like that. As I said, you can pop it in the chat box if you don't feel comfortable kind of speaking out to us, and we can answer it that way.
So
No.
I guess we could sort of clarify what we're looking to see in an inventory and checkout document as well.
Yeah.
So Sam, you've mentioned photographic evidence as being quite important for us when looking at these. What we need to see on photographs is a date, just so we can validate that the photograph has been taken when the inventory or checkout was done. We also need to see detail as well in the property, so it can't be sort of low quality fuzzy photographs, because we won't be able to make any judgments based on that. I guess like a rule of thumb when coming to us and when formulating evidence would be, if a stranger was to look at this, would they be able to understand it? Because that's effectively what we are, and that's what we're looking to do as well. We see a lot of disputes and a lot of cases, but at the same time, every case is different, and we need to be able to be presented with the evidence and be able to understand it in a clear way, because then that'll help us make a judgment as well, and be able to potentially get to an agreement between you.
Definitely. And what I will do is I will give you a little tip, Samantha's tip of the day. Make sure when you're doing your inventory that you include smells in your inventory. Now, this is a thing that a lot of people actually do not include, and you'd be surprised at how helpful it actually could be. So, for example, if you go into the property and check in, you could just simply state it that there's no odors present. This would be helpful if you do find yourself going through a dispute and perhaps a tenant has been smoking in a property. You can then add that there's on the checkout report that there's a strong kind of tobacco smell, and this would kind of show that deterioration there. So as I say, my wee tip of the day, just start including smells in your inventory, and honestly, it is something that is good to include there. Okay, now I can see that somebody did ask a wee question. So our first question says, can you give some tips of negotiating during self-resolution when both parties are not willing to budge? So again, this is where me and Dan can kind of get involved here, right? Because um, it even just takes us maybe talking to each party, having a look at the evidence, and sometimes it does just provide that wee little bit of wiggle room that we need to start getting the negotiations on track there. So perhaps, for example, if um, I will use cleaning as an example. If a property has been cleaned to a professional standard and the inventory says that it's been cleaned to a professional standard, and then on checkout there's quite a lot of cleaning required, we can then talk to the tenants and we can advise that perhaps an award would most likely be made to the agent or the landlord, given the evidence that is available. And that again just starts that wee little ball rolling there of negotiating. And that opens the lines for me, Dan, Paula, and Cameron to kind of open the lines of resolution, kind of discuss resolution and the idea. And that is kind of how we can kind of get that ball rolling there. I hope that helps answer that one.
If I could also just kind of add a little bit more to what you said, Sam. Also, I would say that this is sort of a case where an open mind is paramount. What we can do I guess I should start with saying at the end of the day, it depends on the case. It depends on the amount that's in dispute. If we think that the case is quite complex and both parties are not willing to negotiate, both parties have sort of wedged themselves in and aren't willing to be flexible, then we'll send it through to ADR, where it will be subject to a more formal process and a more kind of a legally backed process. However, if it's a case where the dispute is a fairly small amount, and we can see, as you say, we can see some wiggle room, we'll be able to use the documents that you provided us to advise, and that's where early resolution is quite helpful, because we're able to take a much more inflexible, sometimes harder approach, and say you won't get this award in ADR, and that's something you need to think about going forward, and help to advise like that, I think.
Yeah, perfect. As Dan says, just make sure you come into this kind of thing with an open mind, because if both parties come in with a closed mind, it's just not going to get us anywhere. So as Dan says, open mind is key. Perfect. Has anybody got any other questions? That was quite a good question to get us started there. No, I do understand that it is quite difficult under pressure to think of some questions. We do have our helpline number. If you press number 4, I'm going to say it's number 4. We that puts you through to the ADR team, and we will be also able to help any queries and things there too. Okay. Can see another question there that says, can you help with disputes with neighbours? So landlord versus neighbours. So unfortunately, that is something that we couldn't get involved with. We can only get involved with the deposit. So I'm not quite sure where you would need to go with the landlord versus neighbour query. Dan, any ideas?
I mean, what I would say is probably go to the court for that. Maybe would the first tier tribunal be applicable here?
I don't I don't know. I guess
Yeah,
it depends on the case and kind of what it is kind of regarding.
yeah.
But certainly we can only get involved with matters relating to a deposit. So that would be kind of between either a landlord and a tenant, or an agency and a tenant. Okay.
So no, I guess.
Okay, that was another good question. That's a one that I've never been asked before, to be honest. We got any others? What I'll do is I'll leave it a few wee minutes. If you can think of any, just pop them in the box. But I won't hold you back if you don't have any. Oh, got a good question here. When do you feel best is the best date to carry out an inventory? 3 days before. So we say as close to the tenancy as you can possibly get. I think our maximum is 3 days beforehand. And this just means that anything has less chance of kind of changing in that time. And we also say that the person carrying out the inventory should be the last person in the property. But no, certainly I think 3 days before is the maximum that we kind of go to there, kind of date wise. So yeah, 3 days maximum, close to the tenancy as possible. Okay.
And that goes for checkout documents as well, right?
Checkout as well, yes. So the checkout again is close to the tenancy end date as you can get it. Again, 3 days maximum after the tenancy is ended is kind of what we look at. But yeah, just as close to the tenancy kind of start or end date as you can possibly get it. The closer the better. Okay. Perfect. As I say, I will give it a few wee minutes and then I will let you go because I don't want to keep yous around if we don't need to. Okay. As I say, there's plenty of guidance documents on our website, and obviously there is the helpline number 2. Number 4 gets you to us, and we can answer anything there. And I think number 1 is for the landlord and letting agent, and number 2 is for tenant. I think. Don't quote me on that one. I just know for sure number 4 is us. But if you have any queries or anything at all, just give us a wee call, and we can help that way. Similarly, if you want to send us an email, you can do that too. Okay, I think our email's on our website. Perfect. Well, what I'll do then, if there doesn't seem to be any more questions, is I will stop this here and I will let you go and enjoy the sun whilst it's here. It's not very often that we get it. So perfect. Well, thank you for joining us today. I hope you found that somewhat useful. And we'll hope to see you at some other ones that we have in the future. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate everyone coming out as well.